Welcome into the NBA show here on Coast to Coast Sports. I'm your host, Richard Geraffo, alongside Jordan Desouza and Matthew Andujo. On today's show, we'll be discussing everything in the NBA's Eastern Conference. We'll go over off-season moves as well as playoff predictions, the Tankapalooza that will happen in 2018, and 3 players from each of us that we want to keep an eye on this season. All of that and more on today's NBA edition of Coast to Coast Sports. So for our first segment of the show today, I want to talk about the NBA's Eastern Conference. We're going to talk about the playoff predictions and who we think is a lock, who we think isn't. You know, the East is kind of iffy. It's really top-heavy. The back end's not that great. So here are some teams that I've laid out that I think are pretty much locks to make it. We've got the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Boston Celtics, the Washington Wizards, and the Toronto Raptors. But after that, it gets a little shaky. It's teams that could be locks or they could not. You know, it's the East. They make a lot of weird plays, a lot of transitions as it goes on. We've got the Charlotte Hornets, had a nice offseason. Got the Toronto Raptors, the Philadelphia 76ers maybe, and I guess we're going to find out if the Miami Heat had a real second-half surge last year and see if that translates over into the new season. So, Jordan, I want to start with you. Who do you think is a lock to get into the playoffs?
If I'm going to say a lock, I mean, obviously you have your Cavaliers and Celtics. Obviously, they're going to be locks to make it to the playoffs. But out of those teams, a dark horse, I'm going to say the Miami Heat are a lock. I mean, they were 33-11 post All-Star break last year, which was a great surge. A lot of people want to say, oh, it was just kind of fluke, it was a streak, but that's like more than half the season. Yeah. So they're going to be definitely a team to watch out for. And they're also a team that really hasn't gotten worse since last year. I think they've got one more year where everyone's together. They have Dragic, Waiters, Winslow, Whiteside. So they're going to look to gel together and just maximize their potential as a unit. And this is a team I wouldn't be surprised if they're sneaking into the 5 or 6 seed for next year.
Yeah,
I really like the Charlotte Hornets, what they're doing. They selected Malik Monk with the 11th pick out of Kentucky. They got Dwayne Bacon in the second round with the 40th pick. They also got Dwight Howard, who in 13 consecutive seasons has averaged 10 points and 10 rebounds. Only Wilt Chamberlain has averaged more consecutive seasons doing that. Kemba Walker was an All-Star last year. He's looking to come back this year and do the same thing, averaging more points, more assists. I think the pick and roll with him and Dwight will be a good thing. They also got Michael Carter-Williams to upgrade their bench. He's not really much of a shooter, but he can definitely spread the ball around, get their bench going.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see. You know, Kemba, he had a good year last year, and man, that guy, he could really score. He was in some trade rumors in the offseason with the Cavs. It was kind of a dark horse, but, you know, didn't happen. We'll see if Kemba can up his game from last year, that awesome season that he had. One team that I really think is going to regress, I don't even know if they're going to be in the top 5 of the NBA's Eastern Conference seeding, the Toronto Raptors. I really feel that they had a pretty bad offseason. They lost a lot of pieces, and they're really relying on their younger guys now. They did re-sign Kyle Lowry, their all-star, their best player, as you could say. They also signed C.J. Miles, who's a career 41% three-point shooter, which is just incredible. That's going to give them an aspect of their game that they haven't had the last few years. But, you know, they did lose some guys like P.J. Tucker. He was only there for a year, but he was nice for them. He gave them an aspect, a small ball lineup that they didn't have before. They also lost Amari Carroll and Patrick Patterson. I think Patterson, that's a big loss for them. He was very much so a plus-minus player. He had a big impact on the court, not necessarily on the stat sheet. But, you know, it's nice to get rid of DeMar Carroll because he just, since he signed that contract, he's had a lot of injuries, he's had a lot of problems. And, you know, it's a nice thing off their back.
Yeah, and I think teams like the Raptors, who aren't really in contention to grab a big free agent, they're going to look to grow internally, and I didn't really see much of that this offseason. They have the talent. They've shown that they can get the job done in the regular season, but it's just a matter of just going out and doing it in the playoffs, and they just really haven't been able to do that the past couple of years.
It almost seems that you could say they're starting to get on the treadmill, you know, the treadmill of mediocrity that the Atlanta Hawks have been on for the last 8 years.
Exactly.
They always make the playoffs, but they've never really had a shot. That's going to do it for our first segment. We'll be right back talking of 3 players that we think are going to be great in the Eastern Conference this year. Hello and welcome back into Coast to Coast Sports, the NBA show. In this segment, we're going to talk about 3 players, not necessarily stars, but players that we think can turn into above-average role players or, you know, someone who could take the step and become a star in the NBA. The league's wide open. The game is changing like it never has before. Three-pointers are flying. Anyone can be anything now. It really is impressive. So, for me, I have 3 players that I want to watch in the Eastern Conference. I've got Goran Dragic of the Miami Heat, Kristaps Porzingis of the New York Knicks, and Jabari Parker of the Milwaukee Bucks. I want to start with Dragic. You know, he had a great year last year. He had 20 points per game, and he averaged almost 6 assists. He is a slasher, he is a scorer, he's a facilitator, and he really brought the Miami Heat an element that they haven't had in a while. He upped the pace, he let them run and gun, and like we were talking about earlier with that second half surge, it really just kick-started something incredible. We'll see if that can continue, but I'd look for Dragic to make an All-Star team this year
Definitely
because
agree.
of how depleted the East is.
Of course.
So it's going to be really interesting to watch where he goes. The next player I want to talk about, I think this is a huge year for Kristaps Porzingis. We all know the guy has talent. We all know that he is a unicorn in the modern NBA. But I think this is a really important year for him. I think he has to make the All-Star team. He needs to take that jump from a star, I call him a pseudo-star at this point, into the star range. I think he needs to get there. The Knicks have a very, really, a below-average roster right now.
And I'd agree. This is definitely a career-defining year for Kristaps.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think he has to make the All-Star team. He only took 14.8 shots a game last year. I think that needs to get up to at least 17, 18. And I think a goal for him should be shooting 50% or better from the field.
I believe whatever happens with Melo, if they trade him or not, I feel like he'll get his touches this year. If they trade Melo, he'll definitely get his touches. He is a 7-footer who can create his own shot off the dribble, can create in the post, who's unguardable at the rim. No one else can reach his height. So I understand that the reason why he's not getting touches is because Melo's there, because Melo needs the ball, of course. He's Carmelo.
Yeah.
But if they trade him, Porzingis is the guy on that team. He's the guy in that city. He needs to make the All-Star team. He needs to average at least around 22 points a game this year.
Yeah, and the most important player that I have on my list is Jabari Parker. Last year with the Milwaukee Bucks, he had an awesome year for the first 60 games of the season. He scored about 20 points a game, but he did tragically tear his ACL once again for the second time. He's expected to return around the All-Star break, so we're not going to see him in the beginning of the year. But this is a nice setup for them because without Jabari last year, they went 21-11. Once they got Chris Middleton, he was injured, and they drastically improved, to be honest. But I think this is really going to be an interesting year for Jabari because coming back in the second half, or around the second half, is really going to give them a spark. Whether he comes off the bench or he starts, Jabari is unlike a lot of NBA players. The guy can pack a punch on offense. He is a talented player. He's not that great on defense, and Jason Kidd loves his defense. So I think this is going to be a huge year for Jabari Parker, especially with his contract negotiations coming.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it in basketball, you're going to have to outscore your opponent at the end of the day. And Parker's shown his first couple of years, barring the injuries, that he's just a walking bucket at times.
Yeah.
And I think his defensive flaws can be masked by the other players around him. Guys like Giannis or Brogdon or Tony Snell that can kind of pick up for the lack of defense that Jabari's going to be showing this year.
Yeah, definitely. And working off of that, Jordan, I want to get into your three players. Who do you have for us?
Okay, so I'm going to start off with Miles Turner. So I think we can all agree that the Pacers are going to be a bottom feeder of the East this year. So Miles Turner, so they're going to lose Paul George. So that means Miles Turner is going to be one of their main offensive focuses this year. So he's coming into his third year. He averaged a great 14-7 last year. So I'm going to look for him to build off that. Maybe the field goal percentage might not be as great because he's going to be seeing a lot of double teams and taking a lot of shots. But I expect to see a jump in his points and even rebounds. And then second of all, I'm going to go Ben Simmons. I mean, I think every NBA fan around the nation is excited to watch him.
It's going to be fun.
And I think people realize at this point how good he's going to be. I think he's just going to shoot right through that ceiling. I think if you look at it, if you're going to put a small forward against him, he's just going to muscle you down low. He's a great passer. I mean, he's fast. He's athletic. And even in college, I mean, he didn't really know how to shoot a jump shot, and he still managed to score 20 points a game. And maybe he'll see something similar to the Joel Embiid effect, take a year off, maybe just get the three working
that
over
would
there.
be wonderful.
That'll be good.
It really would.
And then my third player, so this is someone who I think really needs to have a great season in order for their team to be successful, and this is Andre Drummond. So in 2015, Andre Drummond was a 22-year-old, averaged 16 and 14 rebounds. Last year, dipped down to 13 and 13. They've got a great young core in Detroit, but he really needs to ramp it up if they want to maximize their potential as a team overall.
Yeah, not only with the points and the rebounds dipping, he didn't look good on the court either. Truthfully, he looked slow. He looked out of shape. He didn't look good. Drummond, a lot of people were saying that he's the next Dwight Howard. Just 2 years ago when he had an incredible year, like you were talking about, 16 and 14, not a lot of guys can do that. But this is a big year for Drummond. I think you're right about that. And Matthew, who do you have for us?
So for my three players, I have Dennis Schroeder, Chris Middleton, and D'Angelo Russell. We'll start with Dennis Schroeder. So 3 years removed from the 60-win team, the Hawks are finally rebuilding. They've lost all-stars such as Al Horford, Paul Millsap, Kyle Korver, and Jeff Teague, Dwight Howard, and even losing Tim Hardaway Jr. last season. This team is Dennis Schroeder's team. He had a career year last year, averaging 18 points per game, having 6 assists and 3 rebounds. But the thing he can improve on is his turnovers. He ranked 6th in turnovers in the league and ranked 54th in turnovers to assist. So with the ball being in his hands, that'll open up the floor for him. It'll also allow him to make the All-Star team with all the All-Stars leaving in the East. My second, I got Chris Middleton, a player that many NBA fans forget because he's not a flashy player, but he does great things on both sides of the ball. Last year he came back, he played 29 games, averaged close to 15 points per game, but 2 years ago he averaged 18 points per game. I feel with all the All-Stars leaving in the East as well, the Bucks are in a position to have 2 All-Stars along with Giannis, him and Middleton. Lastly, I have D'Angelo Russell. He's playing with a chip this year. Magic Johnson at Lonzo's introductory press conference said that, speaking about Russell, that we needed a leader, we needed a player that players wanted to play with. I think D'Angelo Russell is going to take that to heart and play with the fire. He averaged close to 15 points per game, 5 assists, and being on the Nets, he's going to be the main scoring option. But by being the main scoring option, he's going to have the ball in his hands. His numbers are going to skyrocket and potentially make the All-Star team. What do you guys think?
I mean, I definitely have to agree with you. It's definitely a make or break season for D'Angelo Russell coming into next year.
The same thing with Schroeder. I think they're going to have a lot of opportunity to really show us something. Okay, that's going to do it for this segment. We'll be right back. We're talking about the Cavaliers and Celtics' big trade of the offseason. We'll be right back. Welcome back into Coast to Coast Sports NBA show. I'm Richard Geraffo alongside Jordan Desouza and Matthew Andujo. Guys, something incredible happened in the offseason.
Yep.
The Cavaliers and the Boston Celtics completed a blockbuster trade that could change the very landscape of the NBA. As we all know by now, the Boston Celtics got Kyrie Irving. Now, what they got Kyrie Irving was an interesting haul. The Cleveland Cavaliers picked up Isaiah Thomas, the man who averaged 30 points a game last year, Jay Crowder, the Brooklyn Nets 2018 first rounder, which is expected to fall within the top 5, and a 2020 second round pick as well from the Brooklyn Nets. So guys, I want to ask, who's the winners and the losers? Jordan, who won the trade?
I'm going to go with the Cleveland Cavaliers on this one. I mean, I think they made the most out of a less than ideal situation with Kyrie wanting out of Cleveland. They were still able to make out with a point guard who averaged close to 30 points a game, great scorer. Jay Crowder, which is a great addition, a good two-way defensive player, and then a top 10 pick next year from the Nets. So I think the Cavaliers definitely made out the best out of this trade.
Yeah, and Matthew, I want to ask you a question. Have we seen the best of Kyrie, or is there more to come?
We haven't. He's only 25 years old. I still believe he's a year or two away from his prime, which is crazy to believe because he's crazy good now. But I believe the Celtics won this trade because they're in no rush. They're waiting for Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum to develop. They're waiting for LeBron to leave the East or retire, whatever he's going to do. So they're positioning themselves to be the dominant team along with the Sixers in the East for the next 10 years or so.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting decade or so. We're going to see the downfall of the King. We're going to see what happens with the Warriors. I'm going to see an uprising if Joel Embiid can stay on the court. Oh man,
trust the process,
Oh, it's going to be awesome. Now, I want to ask one more question to you, Jordan. How do you think that Isaiah Thomas fits with the Cavs? Do you like the fit? Do you not like the fit?
I mean, I think he fits just as well as Kyrie fit last year. I mean, he's a guy who can work well off the ball, and I think he's a guy that can do well of commanding that second lineup when LeBron's not going to be on the floor.
Yeah, he's very capable of leading a second unit.
He's a walking bucket.
Oh, yeah. And Matthew, last question. Isaiah Thomas isn't a great defender. In fact, he's one of the 3 or 4 worst defenders in the league. And, that's not taking anything away from the guy's my height. It's incredible that he's putting up what he does. Matthew, the Cavaliers' defense was okay at best last year. What do you think this does for them?
I think it makes them worse, along with the addition of Derrick Rose. Their 2 point guards are awful at defense. I feel if they make the finals this year, they're going to have trouble guarding the Warriors. Steph Curry is just going to have a field day with Isaiah Thomas and Derrick Rose. So it's going to be a challenge this year. Offense will be easy. They'll definitely score some points, but defense is their main problem this year.
Yeah. Well, that's about going to wrap it up here in the NBA show at Coast to Coast Sports. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week. I'm Richard Geraffo alongside Jordan Desouza and Matthew Andujo. Thanks for watching.